The autumn wind swept through the bustling streets of Manhattan as a middle-aged Asian businessman stepped out of his taxi, adjusting his well-worn baseball cap. He just finished a 14-hour flight, and his casual attire, jeans, a simple blue sweater, and his lucky cap that had accompanied him on every business venture for the past decade, felt comfortable after the long journey. He looked up at the gleaming 40-story building that housed the Grand Plaza Hotel, its golden revolving doors spinning with well-dressed guests dragging designer luggage. This was his newest acquisition, though none of the staff knew it yet. He'd made the purchase through his company 2 weeks ago, but had purposely delayed the announcement. After 20 years in the hotel business, he learned that the best way to understand a hotel's true culture was to experience it as a regular guest. His weathered cap, which his daughter had given him years ago, had become something of a good luck charm. It had been with him when he opened his first small motel, through the hardships of nearly going bankrupt, and during the triumphant moment when he acquired his first luxury hotel. Now, standing before his newest property, he felt the familiar excitement of a mystery shopper about to uncover the truth behind the polished facade. As he walked through the revolving doors, the magnificent lobby stretched before him. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over marble floors, and the air carried the subtle scent of fresh flowers arranged in tall vases. Well-dressed guests lounged on plush sofas, while efficient-looking staff members moved about with purpose. He took a moment to absorb the atmosphere, noticing how the bellhops rushed to help guests in expensive suits while ignoring an elderly couple struggling with their modest luggage. These small details, the unconscious biases, the subtle discriminations, were exactly what he had learned to watch for over the years. Walking toward the front desk, he could feel the weight of judgmental glances from both staff and guests. His casual appearance clearly didn't match their expectations of a Grand Plaza Hotel guest. He experienced this countless times before, not just as a casually dressed person, but as an Asian man in an industry that had often questioned his belonging. The memories of his early days flooded back, the countless times he'd been dismissed, redirected to budget hotels, or treated with thinly veiled disdain. Rather than breaking him, those experiences had fueled his determination to create hotels where every guest would feel valued, regardless of their appearance or background. As he approached the front desk, he noticed how the young manager's eyes darted to his cap, then his casual clothes, before her pleasant professional smile transformed into something notably cooler. He knew what would happen next. He'd seen it hundreds of times before. But this time was different. This time, he owned the place. He kept his voice polite and his demeanor humble as he inquired about room availability. The response would tell him everything he needed to know about the hotel's culture, and more importantly, about the changes that would need to be made. As the front desk manager began to speak, he could already see that this interaction would become a powerful lesson in humility and respect, one that would transform not just this hotel, but perhaps the way these employees would treat people for the rest of their lives. The businessman adjusted his cap once more, hiding a small smile. Sometimes the best lessons in life come when you least expect them, and he was about to teach one that nobody in this hotel would ever forget. The front desk manager's lips curved into what could barely pass for a smile as she looked down at her computer screen. "I'm so sorry," she said, though her tone carried no trace of actual regret, "but we're fully booked for tonight." She then immediately turned to help a well-dressed couple who had just walked up, greeting them with genuine warmth. The businessman watched as she quickly found a room for the couple in designer clothes, his suspicions confirmed. He stood there quietly, observing as she completed their check-in process with flourishing hospitality. The contrast in treatment was stark, and exactly what he had come to evaluate. "Are you sure there's nothing available?" he asked softly, maintaining his composure. "I noticed you just found a room for those guests." He gestured politely toward the couple who were now walking toward the elevators with their key cards. The manager's expression hardened slightly. "Sir," she said, emphasizing the word in a way that made it sound anything but respectful, Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the budget hotels down the street. The Holiday Express has very reasonable rates. A young bellhop nearby tried to hide his snicker, and the businessman noticed how other staff members exchanged knowing looks. It was clear this wasn't an isolated incident. It was a culture problem. Instead of leaving, he took a seat in one of the lobby's luxurious armchairs, pulling out his phone. The manager's eyes kept darting nervously in his direction, probably worried he might disturb the real guests. Little did she know, he was taking notes about everything he observed. Over the next hour, he witnessed 3 more similar incidents. A young artist in paint-splattered jeans was directed to a more suitable hotel despite having a confirmed reservation. An elderly woman in simple clothes was made to wait while younger, more fashionably dressed guests were helped first. A group of international tourists were spoken to in unnecessarily slow, condescending tones. The businessman felt his heart grow heavier with each interaction. He built his career on the belief that true luxury wasn't about excluding people. It was about making everyone feel special. As he sat there, he remembered his own struggles, the days when high-end hotels would assume he couldn't afford their rooms just because of how he looked or where he came from. He watched as the front desk manager trained a new employee, catching phrases like, "You can usually tell the right kind of guest by their appearance," and "We have certain standards to maintain." Each word strengthened his resolve to make changes, not through punishment, but through education and understanding. The afternoon wore on, and he noticed how the staff's anxiety about his presence grew. The manager had already sent security to walk past him 3 times, each pass slightly more obvious than the last. He remained seated, calm and observant, occasionally making notes on his phone. What struck him most wasn't just the discrimination, it was how normalized it had become. The staff moved through their choreography of prejudice with practiced ease, probably never stopping to question whether their assumptions about people were fair or right. As the time for the afternoon staff meeting approached, he watched the lobby crew growing restless, whispering among themselves about the suspicious man in the cap who wouldn't leave. The businessman checked his watch. In exactly 15 minutes, the hotel's general manager would be gathering everyone for what they thought was a routine staff meeting. He stood up slowly, straightening his sweater. The front desk manager visibly tensed, probably expecting a confrontation. Instead, he simply walked toward the conference room where the staff was beginning to gather. He knew that what was about to happen would change not just this hotel, but possibly the lives of everyone working there. Sometimes, the most powerful lessons come from the most unexpected teachers. The businessman settled into a corner of the busy lobby, his presence continuing to draw uncertain glances from the staff. From his vantage point, he could see everything: the grand staircase, the check-in desk, and the constant flow of guests moving through the revolving doors. What he witnessed over the next few hours would only confirm his earlier observations. A young couple walked in, their clothes wrinkled from travel but wearing bright smiles. The wife was pregnant, clearly tired from their journey. The front desk staff barely looked up as they approached, offering curt responses to their questions about early check-in. Just moments later, when a man in an expensive suit made the same request, the staff scrambled to accommodate him. The businessman pulled out his phone, quietly documenting each incident. He watched as a famous social media influencer waltzed in, and suddenly the entire lobby sprang to life. Staff members appeared out of nowhere, offering champagne and upgrades, while an elderly man with a cane stood forgotten at the concierge desk, waiting for someone to help him with directions. During his observation, he noticed something else: a young housekeeper who seemed different from the rest. While others rushed past guests who didn't fit their idea of luxury, she stopped to help everyone. She picked up a child's dropped toy, helped an older woman with her bags, and offered directions to a confused-looking family in simple clothes. Her kindness stood out like a beacon in the chaos of prejudice. The businessman made a special note about her. In his experience, sometimes the best teachers of compassion were those who already practiced it naturally. she would be valuable in the changes he planned to make. As the afternoon wore on, he witnessed more troubling scenes. A group of international business people were spoken to in unnecessarily loud, slow English despite clearly being fluent. A family in casual clothes was told the restaurant was fully booked, while tables were openly offered to more elegantly dressed guests. What struck him most was how the staff seemed to work from a mental checklist: designer bags, expensive watches, certain brands of clothing. Those who checked these boxes were treated like royalty. Those who didn't were treated as inconveniences. He thought back to his own journey, remembering the days when he'd walk into luxury hotels and be immediately directed to budget alternatives down the street. Back then, he promised himself that if he ever owned hotels, things would be different. Now, sitting in his own hotel, he realized how deeply these prejudices could root themselves in an organization's culture. The front desk manager kept glancing his way, clearly uncomfortable with his continued presence. He'd seen her send security to walk past him 4 times now, each pass more obvious than the last. Yet he stayed, watching, learning, and planning how to transform this beautiful building into something more than just a luxury hotel, into a place where true hospitality meant welcoming everyone with equal warmth. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, he noticed the staff beginning to get antsy. The afternoon meeting was approaching, the meeting where the general manager would introduce the hotel's new owner. The businessmen watched as they whispered among themselves, probably wondering if they should ask him to leave before their important meeting. He checked his own appearance in the reflection of his phone: the worn baseball cap, the comfortable sweater, the simple jeans. In less than 30 minutes, these same clothes that had deemed him unworthy of service would become a powerful teaching tool. But first, he had one more note to make. The true measure of luxury isn't in how we treat our most privileged guests, but in how we treat everyone who walks through our doors. As the staff began gathering for their meeting, he stood up slowly, causing visible tension among those who had been watching him all afternoon. The moment of truth was approaching, and with it, an opportunity to change not just policies, but hearts and minds. The businessman pulled out his phone and began reviewing the notes he'd collected throughout the afternoon. Each entry told a different story of prejudice, but together they painted a clear picture of the hotel's culture. He documented everything meticulously, knowing that these real examples would be crucial for the changes he planned to implement. His first note described how the bellhops had rushed to help a woman with designer luggage while ignoring a family struggling with their modest suitcases. The timestamp showed 1:15 p.m., just after his own rejection at the front desk. He recorded the exact words used, the body language, even the subtle eye rolls exchanged between staff members. Another entry detailed a conversation he'd overheard between 2 front desk workers. They were joking about a guest who had arrived in a taxi instead of a private car, mocking his request for directions to the nearest subway station. The businessman remembered how his hands had trembled slightly as he typed that note, not from anger, but from determination to change this mindset. He scrolled to a particularly troubling incident from 2:30 p.m. A young man in simple business attire had tried to enter the hotel restaurant for a meeting. The host had stopped him, insisting he must be at the wrong place despite the man showing evidence of his reservation on his phone. Only when his well-dressed business associate came down to vouch for him did the host suddenly become apologetic and accommodating. The next note captured a moment of hope: the kind housekeeper who treated everyone equally. He'd watched her help a lost child find their parents, escort an elderly couple to their room, and offer genuine smiles to every guest she encountered, regardless of their appearance. Her actions stood out precisely because they were so different from the prevailing attitude. As he continued reviewing his notes, the businessman noticed patterns emerging. The staff seemed to have an unwritten code about who deserved their attention. Designer labels earned immediate respect. Expensive jewelry guaranteed swift service. The right accent or appearance meant instant access to all the hotel's amenities. He'd also documented the small acts of kindness that occasionally broke through this pattern. The junior concierge who offered directions to everyone who asked, not just those in expensive suits. The room service waiter who treated every guest with equal respect. These employees would be valuable allies in the changes to come. One of his final notes described an interaction that had occurred just 30 minutes ago. A group of international tourists had been told the rooftop bar was fully booked for a private event. Yet minutes later, he watched as other guests were welcomed up without reservations. He had recorded the exact words, times, and the names of staff involved, not to punish them, but to use as teaching examples. Looking up from his phone, he noticed the staff beginning to gather for their afternoon meeting. The front desk manager was whispering urgently to security, probably worried about his continued presence in the lobby. The businessman felt a mix of emotions. Disappointment at the culture he discovered, but hope for the transformation he knew was possible. He stood up slowly, tucking his phone into his pocket. The notes he'd gathered would serve as the foundation for the changes he planned to implement. Each documented incident would become a lesson in humanity, each example of prejudice a chance for growth and learning. As he walked toward the conference room, he thought about how these notes would help him transform not just this hotel, but the lives of everyone working there. Sometimes the most powerful changes start with simply paying attention and documenting the truth, no matter how uncomfortable that truth might be. The hotel's main conference room buzzed with nervous energy as staff members filed in for their afternoon meeting. The front desk manager kept throwing worried glances at the businessman, who had quietly taken a seat in the back row. She whispered something to security, but before they could act, the general manager walked in, his face beaming with unusual excitement. "Good afternoon, everyone," the general manager announced, his voice carrying across the room. "Today is a very special day for our hotel. As you know, our property was recently acquired by one of the most successful hotel groups in the country. Today, I have the honor of introducing you to our new owner." The staff sat up straighter, smoothing their uniforms and fixing their hair. Many were clearly expecting someone in an expensive suit to walk through the door. The front desk manager even glanced toward the entrance, completely ignoring the man in the baseball cap who was now standing up from his back row seat. The general manager continued, "He's actually been with us all afternoon, observing our operations firsthand." His eyes scanned the room, finally settling on the businessman in the back. "Would you please come forward, sir?" A collective gasp filled the room as the man in the baseball cap made his way to the front. The front desk manager's face drained of color as recognition dawned. Other staff members who had ignored or dismissed him throughout the day sank lower in their seats. Standing at the front of the room, the businessman removed his cap and smiled warmly. "Thank you for the introduction," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I've spent the last few hours experiencing this hotel as a guest might, though perhaps not the kind of guest many of you are used to catering to." The silence in the room was deafening. Some staff members stared at their shoes, others seemed frozen in their seats. The front desk manager looked like she might faint. "I want to tell you a story," he continued, pulling up a chair and sitting down casually. 20 years ago, I walked into a luxury hotel, much like this one. I had just closed my first major business deal and wanted to celebrate. I was wearing clothes very similar to what I'm wearing today. The staff took one look at me and suggested I try the motel down the street. He paused, letting his words sink in. That moment changed my life. It inspired me to build a hotel empire based on one simple principle. True luxury isn't about excluding people. It's about making everyone feel special. The businessman pulled out his phone, but didn't open his notes. Instead, he looked directly at the front desk manager. "When you told me we were fully booked, you immediately found a room for another couple. When you suggested I try the Holiday Express, you didn't know I owned that too." A few nervous laughs broke the tension, but quickly died down as he continued. "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to help us grow. Real change doesn't come from fear. It comes from understanding." He stood up again, replacing his cap. Starting tomorrow, we're going to implement some changes. But they won't just be policy changes. There'll be changes in how we see people, how we treat them, and how we define luxury. Looking around the room, he spotted the kind housekeeper who had shown equal respect to all guests. Some of you already understand what true hospitality means. You'll be instrumental in helping us create a new culture here. As his words settled over the room, something remarkable happened. The front desk manager, who had been fighting back tears, stood up. "Sir," she said, her voice shaking, "I need to apologize." The businessman raised his hand gently. "No apologies needed. Instead, let's focus on what we're going to do differently tomorrow. Because tomorrow is when we start turning this hotel into something extraordinary. A place where every guest feels like a VIP, regardless of what they're wearing or how they look." The room fell silent again, but this time it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of people beginning to see things differently, of minds opening to new possibilities. The businessman put his cap back on and smiled. The real work was about to begin. After the initial shock of the revelation subsided, the businessman did something unexpected. Instead of launching into a lecture about proper hotel management, he pulled up a chair and sat down casually, making himself level with his employees. His action immediately changed the atmosphere in the room from tense to thoughtful. "Before we talk about changes," he began, his voice warm and encouraging, "I'd like to share something personal with you." He leaned forward, removing his cap and turning it in his hands. "This cap isn't just a fashion choice. It was a gift from my daughter when I opened my first small motel on the outskirts of town. Back then, I couldn't afford a suit. I wore this cap to every bank meeting, every supplier negotiation, and faced rejection after rejection." The front desk manager, who had been staring at the floor, slowly looked up. Others in the room began to lean forward, drawn in by the genuine emotion in their new owner's voice. "But here's what's interesting," he continued. "Those rejections taught me something priceless. They showed me exactly how it feels to be judged based on appearance. And that knowledge, it became the foundation of my success." He stood up and walked to the whiteboard, picking up a marker. "Today, I saw many things in our lobby. Some made me sad, others gave me hope." He began writing 2 columns. What we saw and what we could be. Under the first column, he wrote about the incidents he'd witnessed. The elderly couple with their luggage, the pregnant woman who needed to sit down, the international tourists who were dismissed. But instead of pointing fingers, he turned each incident into a question. What if we had helped? What if we had smiled? What if we had shown them our best? The room remained quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now, not of shame, but of reflection. Even the security guard, who had been eyeing him suspiciously all afternoon, was nodding thoughtfully. "But I also saw hope," he continued, moving to the second column. "I watched a housekeeper who treated every guest like they were special. I saw a junior concierge help a lost child. These moments proved that we already had the foundation for something extraordinary here." Then he did something that surprised everyone. He asked the front desk manager to stand up. The woman, still visibly uncomfortable, slowly rose to her feet. "You're going to help lead our new training program," he said gently. Her eyes widened in surprise. Because who better to teach about the importance of fair treatment than someone who has just experienced this powerful lesson firsthand? He turned to address the whole room again. "We're not going to focus on what went wrong today. Instead, we're going to use these experiences to build something better. Starting tomorrow, we're launching what I call the cap test." He placed his baseball cap on the conference table. "Every member of our management team will spend 1 day a month approaching different hotels, including ours, dressed in casual clothes. They'll document their experiences, good and bad, and we'll learn from them." The tension in the room had completely dissolved now, replaced by genuine interest and even a few smiles. The businessman picked up his cap again, running his fingers along its worn brim. "But most importantly," he concluded, We're going to create a place where every guest has a story worth telling. Not because of how we judged them, but because of how we didn't judge them at all. As his words settled over the room, hands began to raise, not with defenses or excuses, but with ideas. The front desk manager suggested creating a blind service standard, treating every guest exactly the same for their first 5 minutes, no matter what. The security guard proposed a weekly sharing session where staff could discuss their own experiences with prejudice. The businessman smiled, putting his cap back on. This was exactly what he had hoped for, not just change from the top down, but transformation from within. The real work was just beginning, but the seeds of change had been planted in the most fertile soil of all: understanding. Over the next month, something remarkable began to happen at the Grand Plaza Hotel. The front desk manager, who had once judged guests by their appearance, threw herself into leading the new training program with unexpected passion. Her personal experience of misjudging the owner had transformed her into the hotel's most passionate advocate for change. One morning, she gathered the staff in the training room, wearing casual clothes herself. "Today, we're going to do something different," she announced, her voice carrying the confidence of someone who had learned from their mistakes. "I want each of you to share a time when someone judged you unfairly." The stories poured out. A bellhop talked about being ignored at expensive stores. A housekeeper described how people assumed she couldn't speak English well. The security guard shared his experience of being followed in high-end shops. As each person spoke, the room grew closer, understanding deepening with every story. The businessman, who occasionally dropped by unannounced, always in his signature cap, watched with quiet satisfaction as his hotel began to transform. He observed how the staff started treating every guest like a VIP, regardless of their appearance or luggage type. The changes were small at first. The doormen began greeting everyone with the same warm smile, whether they arrived in a luxury car or on foot. The concierge stopped assuming guests' needs based on their clothes and started asking thoughtful questions instead. The restaurant host learned to welcome everyone with equal enthusiasm. The CAP test became a powerful tool for maintaining these standards. Each week, different staff members would visit the hotel in casual clothes, testing how their colleagues treated unknown guests. These experiences were shared in team meetings, not to point fingers, but to help everyone grow. One particular incident stood out. A famous celebrity had arrived at the hotel on the same day as a group of backpackers. The staff, putting their new training into practice, provided the same exceptional service to everyone. The celebrity was so impressed by this equal treatment that they posted about it on social media, praising the hotel's authentic hospitality. Guest reviews began to change too. "I've never felt so welcome in a luxury hotel," wrote one guest. "They treated my family like royalty, even though we were clearly tourists on a budget," shared another. The hotel's rating soared, not because they'd upgraded their facilities, but because they'd upgraded their humanity. The front desk manager organized weekly sharing sessions where staff could discuss challenging situations and how they handled them. During one session, a new employee shared how he almost slipped into old habits of judgment, but caught himself by remembering the owner's story. Training now included practical exercises. Staff members would role-play various scenarios, learning to check their unconscious biases. They practiced finding ways to make every guest feel special, not through grand gestures, but through genuine care and attention. The businessman's casual visits became legendary among the staff. Sometimes he'd appear in his usual cap and sweater, other times in a business suit, testing whether the service remained consistent regardless of his appearance. To his delight, it increasingly did. One day, he overheard two housekeepers talking as they cleaned a room. "You never know who people really are," one said to the other. "And it doesn't matter anyway. Everyone deserves our best." He smiled, knowing that the lesson had truly sunk in. The hotel's transformation wasn't just about customer service, it was about human dignity. Staff members began carrying this new awareness into their personal lives, treating people differently in their own communities. The ripple effect was beginning to spread beyond the hotel's walls. As the front desk manager often said in her training sessions now, luxury isn't about marble floors and crystal chandeliers. It's about making every single person feel valued. And in this, the hotel was becoming truly luxurious indeed. 6 months had passed, and the Grand Plaza Hotel had become something extraordinary. Word spread through the city about a luxury hotel where everyone was treated like a VIP, regardless of their appearance or background. The transformation was so remarkable that even rival hotels started taking notice. One rainy Tuesday morning, a travel magazine journalist arrived to write a story about the hotel's remarkable turnaround. She hadn't made her identity known, wearing simple jeans and a raincoat. To her surprise, she received the same exceptional treatment as the wealthy businessman checking in next to her. The front desk manager, who now wore a small cap pin on her uniform as a daily reminder, shared the hotel's journey with pride. "We don't just train staff here," she explained to the journalist. "We transform mindsets. Every morning, we ask ourselves, how can we make each guest feel truly special today?" The journalist wandered through the hotel, observing countless small moments that told the bigger story. A bellhop rushing to help an elderly couple with their worn suitcases. A concierge spending extra time helping a backpacker plan their city tour. A restaurant server treating a family in casual clothes with the same attention as business executives at the next table. The hotel's reputation grew beyond just great service. It became known as a place where people could be themselves. Business travelers would show up in suits or hoodies, knowing they'd be equally welcome. International tourists no longer felt they had to dress up to be treated with respect. Guest reviews flooded online platforms. "First luxury hotel where I didn't feel out of place in my regular clothes. They made my family feel like we belonged, even though we saved for months for this stay. Finally, a 5-star hotel with a heart." The businessman's CAP test had evolved into an industry-leading training program. Other hotels began sending their staff to learn. The front desk manager, once embarrassed by her past behavior, now proudly led these training sessions, using her own story to teach others about the power of looking beyond appearances. During one training session, a participant asked about the financial impact of treating everyone equally. The businessman, who happened to be present, in his signature cap, of course, stood up with a smile. "Our revenue has doubled," he said, "not because we changed our prices, but because we changed our hearts." The hotel's success story reached the hospitality industry's biggest publications. But what made the owner most proud wasn't the recognition. It was overhearing a young bellhop tell a new employee, "At this hotel, we don't see guests' clothes or luggage. We see their humanity." Social media played its part too. Guests began sharing their experiences online. Photos of casual travelers enjoying 5-star treatment, stories of exceptional service regardless of appearance, videos of staff going above and beyond for every guest. The hotel didn't have to advertise anymore. Their guests did it for them. One day, a group of international hotel owners visited, curious about the hotel's transformation. They found the businessman in the lobby, wearing his usual cap, chatting with guests. "Your success must have required a huge investment," one visitor commented. The businessman touched his cap and replied, "The only investment we made was in human dignity. Everything else followed naturally." The front desk manager, who had once turned away the owner himself, now kept a small photo on her desk. It showed her with the businessman, both wearing baseball caps, taken at the hotel's 6-month celebration of their new culture. "It reminds me daily," she would tell her staff, "that true luxury isn't about what people wear or carry. It's about how we make them feel." 1 year after that fateful day, the businessman returned to the Grand Plaza Hotel. This time, he wasn't alone. He brought along a group of young hotel management students who had been studying the hotel's remarkable transformation. As always, he wore his trusted baseball cap. Walking through the revolving doors, he noticed something different. The lobby was buzzing with a diverse mix of guests. Business executives in suits chatting with tourists in shorts, backpackers comparing travel notes with luxury travelers. Everyone seemed perfectly at ease, exactly as he had envisioned. The front desk manager, who now held the position of chief of guest experience, was training a new employee at the desk. "Remember," he overheard her say, "every guest who walks through that door has a story. Our job isn't to judge their story, it's to become a positive part of it." He watched as she practiced what she preached. A young couple in wrinkled travel clothes approached the desk, looking nervous about staying in such a grand hotel. The manager's face lit up with a genuine smile as she welcomed them, making them feel like they were coming home rather than checking into a luxury hotel. The students with him took notes eagerly as he pointed out small but significant details. How the doorman's smile never wavered regardless of who walked in. How the bellhops rushed to help everyone with their bags. How the concierge gave each guest their full attention, whether they were asking about expensive restaurants or local food trucks. In the restaurant, they observed breakfast service in full swing. A young family with 2 noisy children was treated with the same warmth and attention as a group of international business executives. The waitstaff moved smoothly between tables, their service consistently excellent for everyone. The businessman gathered his students in the same conference room where he had revealed his identity a year ago. "Look around," he said, gesturing to the hotel's new mission statement on the wall. "True luxury is treating everyone like they matter, because they do." As if to demonstrate this principle in action, a commotion arose outside the conference room. A famous celebrity had arrived unexpectedly, at the same time as a large family wearing matching vacation t-shirts. The staff handled both arrivals with equal grace and professionalism, proving that the changes weren't just for show, they had become part of the hotel's DNA. The front desk manager joined their group, now wearing her own baseball cap. It had become something of a symbol among the staff. "The cap test continues," she explained to the students. "But now it's rare to find any problems. The real test is in the stories our guests tell about us." She shared some recent guest feedback. A truck driver who had saved up for his wedding night. A famous musician who loved the hotel because they treated his entire crew with respect. A grandmother who felt like a queen during her first luxury hotel stay. Each story reflected the same theme: genuine, unbiased hospitality. The businessman saved the best lesson for last. He took his students to meet the housekeeping staff, the bellhops, the kitchen workers, the people who really made the hotel's transformation possible. Each one shared their perspective on how treating every guest with equal respect had changed not just their work, but their lives. As the day ended, the businessman stood once more in the lobby, adjusting his cap. A year ago, he had been judged for wearing it. Now, it had become a symbol of the most successful hotel transformation in the city's history. But more than that, it had become a reminder that true change is possible when people open their hearts as wide as their doors. The last words he shared with his students weren't about profit margins or occupancy rates. "Remember," he said, touching the brim of his cap, "luxury isn't about marble floors or crystal chandeliers. It's about making every single person feel valued. Because in the end, we're not in the hotel business, we're in the human dignity business."